The UN is trying to take away our God-given right to abuse disabled people. Welcome to the Most Censored News. I'm Lee Camp. Out of the nearly 200 countries in the world, there is one country that does not behave like the others even remotely. There is one country that is outside the norm in almost every regard. It's a rogue nation.
We've gone rogue. Code red!
And it's about time we called this rogue nation to account. All right, we need to just tie it down, chain it up, put one of those dog funnel things on it so it can't bite people on each side. That thing, put that on it. This is a dangerous rogue nation, and by now you've probably guessed who I'm talking about. I'm speaking, of course, of Nauru in Micronesia, those goddamn palm tree mongers with their uppity thatched hutches on the beaches. What'd we ever do to you? No, actually, I'm talking about the true rogue nation, the United States. And I'll give you the proof in just a minute. My intern's still completing the research. You see, until the early 2000s, rogue state or rogue nation was an expression U.S. officials used a lot. They would use it to describe any country that wasn't doing what they wanted, that was out of line with U.S. policy. Countries like Iran, Iraq, Cuba, Syria, Libya, Venezuela, Russia, Nauru, of course. They were all called rogue states at various times. Nowadays, the U.S. government has a new expression that seems to mean essentially the same thing. U.S. officials say, that country is not abiding by the rules-based international order.
When it comes to the way we're approaching the relationship with China, and I've said this before, but it's important to emphasize it, we're not seeking to contain China. We're not seeking to hold China back. We are seeking, resolutely so, to uphold the rules-based international order. And in a practical way, that means insisting that countries make good on their commitments and play by the rules that we've all agreed to.
Yeah, China needs to play by the rules we've all agreed to. Otherwise, it's unfair. There's only one problem. Every country's agreed to those rules except the United States. Journalist Alan McLeod made some nifty maps to help us out. Here's a map of the countries that agree food is a human right. The vote was 180 to 2. The only two countries in the entire UN to think that food should not be a human right are the US and Israel, two of the richest and most powerful countries in the world. You'd think they wouldn't be threatened by the idea that everyone across this globe deserves a goddamn banana now and again. A banana, maybe a kumquat. And that's the only time I've said kumquat that angrily. Seriously, we throw away 40% of all food across America, and our government of sociopaths is concerned about the idea that food should be a human right? How about this one? In blue are the countries that ratified the UN Convention on Rights of the Disabled. Do you notice a big yellow one? That's right, the US won't even pass the globally recognized rights of the disabled. And some Republicans who were opposed to it said it was because the convention eroded US sovereignty. Yeah, the UN is trying to take away our God-given right to abuse disabled people. If I want to push someone in a wheelchair down a hill for kicks, or quietly put termites in a double amputee's wooden legs, who is the UN to say I can't? And if you agreed with that statement, not realizing it was a joke, then please go beat yourself around the head and neck with a meat tenderizer. But the disabled are not the only ones the American government hates. In yellow are the countries that didn't ratify the UN Convention on Rights of the Child. Every country in the UN, 196 at the time, except the US, signed this. It provides children worldwide with rights like life, liberty, to be raised by their parents, to not be executed. It also prohibits the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography. So you can clearly see why the US wouldn't want to sign such a thing. While we're kicking disabled people down and knocking the food out of a homeless man's hands, we might want to sell a child or two to one of the people listed on Jeffrey Epstein's visitor logs. You know, Clinton, Gates, Prince Andrew, Dershowitz, Kevin Spacey. You can see our dilemma. We clearly want China and Russia to abide by the rules-based international order, but we also have a a backlog of children we need to unload at the docks. So we can't stop selling kids right now, but maybe in a few years, once we get our inventory down a little more, we'll be willing to sign on to that. Want to see another map? In red are the countries that in 2018 voted against the UN Convention combating the glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism, and other practices that contribute to fueling contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Only 2 countries voted against combating, glorifying Nazism and all those other things. And the US is one of them. I guess that makes sense considering we love intolerance. Fucking adore it. Have you been to America? I live here, and we love intolerance. The U.S. government is intolerant of children, the disabled, the homeless, the hungry, refugees, foreigners, immigrants, poor people, people who aren't poor but don't have at least 3 houses, a boat, and a dock, trans people, trans fats, lactose, totally intolerant of that one, gluten, mimes, women who won't stay in the goddamn kitchen. The list goes on, you get the point. The only thing we fully tolerate is intolerance. And in terms of the Nazis, of course we don't want to come down against them because we've been buddies with the Nazis ever since the day World War II wrapped up and we began Operation Paperclip, the top secret U.S. intelligence program which brought Nazi German scientists to America to harness their brainpower for Cold War initiatives. Why not give nice jobs to top Nazis? I bet we got them for cheap. Probably hardly Holocaust us anything. What'd I say? If Paperclip isn't enough to show our love of Nazis and Nazi-ish people, how about Operation Gladio, a NATO and CIA project after World War II funding and arming far right-wing extremists to secretly battle or sometimes assassinate leftists and communists?
On November the 9th, 1990, the Prime Minister of Italy, Giulio Andreotti, revealed to his own parliament and the world the existence of a top-secret European-wide network of secret agents. It was called Gladio. This network of stay-behind groups was intended to fight a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. Andreotti's announcement led to an immediate reaction in the capitals of Europe. The suspicion was that some parts of the Gladio structures were involved in internal subversion.
That bullshit went into the 1990s, long after Tina Turner, Kenny Rogers, and Michael Jackson sang "We Are the World." The CIA, NATO, and others were still busy with Operation Gladio. And nowadays, we're arming Nazis in Ukraine, so you can see why we didn't want to sign an anti-Nazi UN resolution. Then, just a few months ago, the U.S. was yet again out of line with the entire world when it came to ending the blockade of Cuba. Out of the 193-member UN General Assembly, 185 countries supported the condemnation, with only the United States and Israel opposing it. 185 to 2 in favor of ending the economic war on an island country that hasn't hurt anyone in the past 60 years, unless you count liver damage due to underpriced mojitos. Those will get you, man. And since we're talking about abiding by rules, perhaps one of the most important global rules, I'd put it right up there near the top. Don't be a goddamn war criminal, all right? Is that not something we can agree upon? The organization that is supposedly tasked with enforcing that is the International Criminal Court. But the U.S. does not recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. It ended up being one of only 7 countries in the world that voted against the treaty. And the U.S. government went one step further than just voting against it. One step further than those other 6 countries. In 2002, our government passed something lovingly called the Hague Invasion Act. The law authorizes the use of military force to liberate any American or citizen of a U.S. allied country being held by the court located in The Hague. Yes, folks, we said we'd invade the Netherlands if they even thought about prosecuting us for our war crimes. Tough to say if they'd put up much of a fight with the wooden shoes and the tulips. U.S. troops should be warned, though, that in the red light district, they charge extra for the tulips. So clearly, the U.S. is out of step with the rest of the world when it comes to international laws and international norms. We're out of step because we're goose-stepping. So with all of that said, what in God's name is the rules-based order our government keeps speaking of? What does that even mean?
When you ask them, what is this? What do you mean rules-based order? What rules? They don't tell you what the rules are. Whose rules? They don't tell you whose rules. And what are these rules? Well, it's quite clear the only two rules are, two, you will do whatever the United States says, and if you don't, we will crush you. Those are the two rules. But that's not international law. That's international gangsterism. That's the thinking of gangsters, of mafia.
Sorry, was I saying we're a rogue nation? Gangster sounds so much better, doesn't it? Just more crisp. Or how about antibiotic-resistant virus? That has a nice ring to it. By the way, you know that was Condoleezza Rice's maiden name. Beyond simply not signing on to international norms and global law, the US government also has this pesky habit of committing war crimes and breaking the Geneva Conventions, which is also part of the rules-based global order. For example,
We tortured some folks.
yeah, that. We've also committed coups around the world. We've assassinated some folks, to put it politely. Despite it being wholly unjustified, we've invaded and bombed the shit out of sovereign nations like Afghanistan, Vietnam, Cambodia, Korea, Libya. What's that other one? It's on the tip of my tongue.
The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, too. Anyway.
That's the one. Nice of W to come clean like that, isn't it? And how many have died from that war and other war on terror events over the past 20 years? That's right, 6 million people. When you've killed 6 million people with your wholly unjustified illegal invasions, I think you're the fucking rogue state.
We've gone rogue.
On top of that, the US is alone in having 800 to 900 military bases around the world in at least 70 countries. In case you're curious, how many do these super villainous nations of Russia and China have outside of their own territory? Well, for Russia, it's about 20, mostly in former Soviet bloc countries. And for China, they have 1 in Djibouti. So which one is the rogue state again? Do you think it's the country with the 1 military base or the country with the 800? I'm unclear on that. This is like a guy with 800 lice, ticks, and bed bugs living all over him, turning to a guy with 1 and going, "You are disgusting. You are gross, man." The US also spends more on military than the bottom 144 countries combined. In fact, if you count the black budget, the stuff we average citizens aren't allowed to see, the US spends double what the bottom 144 countries combined spend. I think it's pretty clear that when it comes to the US government,
We've gone rogue.
and not only is the US a rogue state, but it's quite possible the US war machine is now trying to replace the UN. As Eric Suisse posited last week, he said, the hope there is that the US government will replace the UN and will come to dictate to the rest of the world whatever the US and its allies can agree to label as being an international rule. Isn't that exciting? Means I can finally get back to being paid for my true passions, selling children and tripping disabled folks. That's it for this week's Most Censored News. But I also do 2 hours of interviews with amazing people like Richard Wolff, Chris Hedges, Scott Ritter, Stella Assange. All of that is at youtube.com/behindtheheadlines. And if you can support us, that would be incredible because we are independent media. So please support us at patreon.com/behindtheheadlines. Keep fighting.